Welcome to the online service for the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Chesapeake for April 5th, 2020. I am Bob Clegg, and I'm grateful to Yvonne, the board, and the worship committee, and to Dee and others of you in Prince Frederick for the opportunity to lead this service from Connie's and my home in New Market, Maryland. This week's order is greatly modified from what you're familiar with when we're together in person. In particular, music will be conspicuous by its absence today. I hope you'll be able to add music back to your services in coming weeks. But to give you an idea of what to expect this morning, our order of service will start with a chalice lighting and chalice words. That will be followed by a reading and then a moment of silent meditation, and then the sermon. Finally, we'll close with the chalice extinguishing and the extinguishing words. Before we continue, if you'd like to join me in keeping a chalice for the duration of this service, I invite you to pause the video now and fetch a candle and a source of flame. We light our chalice with these words from Leonard Cohen. I heard my soul singing behind a leaf. I plucked the leaf, but then I heard it singing behind a veil. I tore the veil, but then heard it singing behind a wall. I built up the wall. Oh, I didn't. I broke the wall, and then I heard my soul singing against me. I built back the wall. I mended the curtain, but I could not put back the leaf. And I held the leaf in my hand, and I heard my soul singing mightily against me. And this is what it is like to study without a friend. May we always have a friend to study with. The reading this morning comes from the Jewish inscription and Christian scriptures, which comprise our Unitarian Universalist fourth source, and they are an important part of our historical heritage. So on this Palm Sunday, let us start with a text from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. It reads, "When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might come and anoint him. Very early on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. They were saying to one another, 'Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?' Looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away already, although it was extremely large. They entered the tomb, and they saw a young man sitting at the right, wearing a white robe, and they were amazed. And he said to them, 'Do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who has been crucified. But he is risen. He is not here. And behold, here is the place where they had laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he has told you.' And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had gripped them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid." Thus ends the Gospel of Mark. Now, in the moment or so of silence that follows, please consider this question. Are you willing to consider the idea that the Bible, as well as other world scriptures, might offer truths that become apparent only when we stop taking the words literally? Now, when I read from the Gospel of Mark a few moments ago, I stopped at Mark 16:8 and said, "Thus ends the Gospel of Mark." Now, if you open up an English translation of the Christian Bible, you're going to find 12 more verses after where I stopped, for a total of 20 verses in that chapter. Then how can I claim that verse 8 is the end of the Gospel of Mark? Well, that claim rests on the evidence of the best and the oldest manuscripts of Mark. Now, as most people know, the Christian Bible was not originally written in the King James Version. In ancient times, the Bible existed as handwritten manuscripts. Pages wore out and had to be recopied, and new copies were made to send to other locations. So in the process, many additions and deletions and errors naturally happened. So now we have nearly 500,000 different variations in the words of the Bible in ancient languages, variations that disagree with each other in some form or fashion. Now, the two oldest surviving manuscripts of the end of Mark date from about 325 to 360 CE. Both of those manuscripts stop cold at what we call verse 8. That dating shows that verses 9 through 20, which started appearing around 400 CE, are later additions. So only verses 1 through 8 reflect the state of mind of Jesus' followers in the first century. The first century edition of Mark ends with women running from an empty tomb. They're in terror and amazement. They tell no one. They make no explicit claim that Jesus beat death, yet they don't say that Jesus didn't come back to life either. Mark's writer just infers that he is alive and then just leaves us hanging with this ambiguity. The body is missing. Did it get stolen? Or was it not really dead to begin with? Or did it come back to life? Or what? Now let's remember, Mark wasn't written the week after the crucifixion. The readership was the members of a Jewish Christ cult that had been developing for 4 or 5 decades. These people lived in a time of intense political and social upheaval. The Romans were busy leveling Jerusalem, looting the temple, and selling nearly all the survivors into slavery. This was 50 years after Jesus died when Mark was written. Now, as he painted his picture of fearsome uncertainty, Mark's author puts a life or death question to the members of his Jewish Christ cult. He asks them to decide for themselves what the tenets of their new religion mean to them, and how is that new religion going to serve to reorganize their lives going forward. Now, as a Unitarian Universalist, I still find this story with its experiential communication of fear, anxiety, uncertainty, and doubt. Its communication of all these things is useful to help me make meaning in my life. And that's what theology is all about, making meaning. What meaning can I assign to my life? What meaning can I claim personally in a universe that expresses no objective intrinsic meaning itself? That is, does this story and its uncertain meaning, or does this story and its uncertain ending have any meaning for us as Unitarian Universalists in and around Prince Frederick, Maryland on this Palm Sunday nearly 2,000 years later? The fear and uncertainty in Mark clearly evokes the elephant in the living room today in this strange and frightening time of coronavirus. Many of us have real concerns. All of us have real concerns. And not just about whether we or somebody close to us is going to contract coronavirus and die. The economic shutdown is historic in its magnitude and unprecedented in its speed. Never before has unemployment shot from 3% to 20% in 2 months as it appears likely to do. And the political and geopolitical consequences remain unknown. Will this help one side or the other in the elections next November? Will those elections even happen on schedule? Will emergency powers, which I agree are in the public interest, ever be fully relinquished by the executives who have now assumed them? Or might this crisis usher in a new wave of authoritarianism? Now, that's about as low as I'm going to go this morning. But all of that gives us an idea of how the early Christians felt when Jerusalem was being burnt to the ground. Just as ancient proto-Christians likely pondered the ending of the Gospel of Mark, we might well meditate today on these questions. How shall we respond in our present situation? What is our principal way of living in these strange times when nothing seems certain? To borrow from Barbara Haggerty, author of Life Reimagined, how can we reimagine our lives during these disorienting chapters in life when we feel like we're drowning in doubt and uncertainty? My wife has a line that she uses in moments when she and I need to reimagine our lives. Whenever we have a little conundrum, I'll be groping for a way out, and she'll take a deep breath and then breathe out, and she'll say, well, we have choices. And then we start listing together all the choices we really do have. As strange as these times are, most of us do have healthy choices that we can make today. Depending on our mobility, many of us can choose to go outside and walk around. The governor's March 30th order does allow us to go outside for exercise in small groups with appropriate physical distancing. We can choose to set a clock to get us out of bed at regular hours instead of confusing our biological clocks by sleeping way into the day and then sitting up half the night. We can choose to limit our TV and web surfing, or at least limit our watching to normal hours. We can also choose to limit the amount of news we take in, and we can choose the quality of the news that we put into our heads. Remember, it takes 5 positive inputs to equal the effect on our mood as 1 negative input. That ratio was proved by a couple of psychiatrists, Gottman and Levinson, who did long-term longitudinal studies where they learned to accurately predict with over 90% accuracy the couples that would stay together and those who would get divorced. They made their predictions based on the ratio of positive and negative statements the couples, the partners, made to each other when they were given 15 minutes to solve a problem together. That magic ratio is 5 to 1. That is, for every negative interaction during conflict, a stable and happy marriage has 5 or more positive interactions. And for the last few weeks, I watched my breaking news intake like a hawk. Amazingly, since I started out, I haven't missed a single news alert that my life depended on. Speaking of positive inputs, there's a great website, the Good News Network. That's the name of it, the Good News Network. And for 20 years, they've been publishing positive secular news from around the world. Their stated goal is to help millions of people become more optimistic. It was on the Good News Network that I learned about the EXO World Summit, a global online conference with the goal of using the unity that humanity is experiencing in this crisis and turning it into permanent good. And that reminds me of another book, A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, who argues that the unity people feel in disaster and the positive changes that we respond to each other or the positive changes in how we respond to each other in disasters, these changes are not always temporary to be forgotten about after the disaster is over. She cites the life of Dorothy Day, the person who established the radical Catholic worker houses, whose life was permanently reorganized around the principle of altruism, while she watched people help each other with joy in the days after the San Francisco earthquake of 1906 when she was only 8 years old. We have no idea how many children today are being formed for lives of service as they watch adults respond in the current crisis. And Our responses are ultimately the fruit of our decisions, our own choices, and our relationships with the people that we choose to include in our lives. I believe that we already have the answers inside of us. We already know what we need to be doing. In Unitarian Universalism, our general method is to act in this world for peace and justice. What choices can you make in your personal life in this time of coronavirus to reach out beyond your own four walls, virtually or with respectful personal distancing physically? What choices can you make to reach out and act for peace and justice in the coming days? Hint, the Good News Network is a good place to start if you're looking for ideas. Every one of us is in a unique situation. Everybody has to solve this for themselves. I can only speak for myself. And so far, my saving grace has been relationships. Purposefully connecting with others is the most important way I've been making meaning in these weird days. 2 weeks ago, we closed the physical doors of Justice Jobs, the free jobs office where I work in Frederick. But last week, we got set up with telephone and video conferencing, and now our volunteers are working from home, once again helping job applicants apply for jobs and get interviews. Open jobs are still out there for people who want to work in critical areas. And those people are the real heroes, the people who need a job and can work on the front lines, whether they're in a hospital or a retirement home or a grocery store or a warehouse or the manufacturing sector. Those are the real heroes. Beyond work, for me, relationships are just as important in keeping me in balance. Video conferencing, the internet, and the phone all connect me to my self-help fellowship and my home congregation. I've talked to people on the phone who I haven't seen for years. For me, meditation helps too, but the time spent with others online and on the phone, seeing their faces, hearing their voices, experiencing our love for each other, that time and those connections are critical for keeping me from getting too low. That's how it's worked for me so far. We started out talking about Mark and about how that book implicitly challenged its readers to consider what their religion really meant to them. And then we moved on to ponder what our religion might mean to us in this strange and difficult time. At the end of Mark, the young man at the tomb tells them to go back to Galilee, and spread the good news. If you take only one thing from this morning, I hope you'll remember that this congregation's Galilee is southern Maryland. And with that geography in mind, I invite you to reflect on Mark's question: how are we called, in the circumstances of our lives, to carry the good news of our UU principles, the good news that if we all work together, we can help each other through this thing, whatever it is. We're going to delight the chalice now, and we'll extinguish our chalice with these words from Wayne B. Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone. I want to thank you for joining this congregation on this Palm Sunday in the year 2020 CE. You have been as helpful to me today by having me lead this meeting as I may have been to you on your end. May you take something from this time that we have spent together, some thought or smell or feeling or inspiration, to use to your benefit and for that of another person in the coming week. We are better for having spent this time together. Go in peace. And I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Amen.